The fastest way to destroy a good person's life isn't with a weapon. It starts with one wrong assumption. Rain tapped against the sidewalks of downtown Baltimore as the city struggled awake after a long night, and the morning rush blurred into a river of umbrellas, coffee cups, and impatient footsteps. Few people noticed the tall black man walking alone with quiet purpose, his charcoal hoodie pulled over short-cropped hair, his eyes carrying the unmistakable exhaustion of someone who had spent the entire night fighting to keep strangers alive. Dr. Marcus Ellington had just finished a 16-hour emergency surgery rotation, but to everyone passing by, he was simply another face disappearing into the gray morning. He carried no briefcase, wore no expensive watch, and displayed none of the symbols people often trusted more than character itself. Less than 2 blocks away, Officers Daniel Brooks and Ethan Walker watched the sidewalk from their patrol vehicle, scanning every movement with practiced suspicion. When Brooks spotted Marcus adjusting the strap of a weathered backpack before crossing the street, something about the image fit a story his mind had already written. Without knowing a single fact, he decided he already understood the man walking ahead of him. The patrol car eased toward the curb, its lights flashing briefly without sirens, drawing curious glances from nearby pedestrians. Marcus stopped immediately, turned calmly, and waited with both hands visible. He had learned years ago that remaining composed often mattered more than explaining yourself. Brooks stepped out first, his voice sharp and confident, asking Marcus where he was going so early and why he looked nervous. Marcus answered politely that he had just finished work and was heading home for a few hours of sleep before returning to the hospital later that afternoon. The explanation seemed only to deepen the officer's skepticism. Ethan asked where he worked, but before Marcus could finish answering, Brooks interrupted with another question, another demand, another assumption layered on top of the last. Around them, people slowed down. A woman carrying breakfast paused beside a newspaper stand. A delivery driver lowered his window. Someone quietly lifted a phone, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Marcus never raised his voice. He never argued. He simply repeated that he was willing to cooperate and asked if there was a specific reason he had been stopped. Instead of answering, Brooks instructed him to place his hands behind his back while the officers sorted everything out. The cold click of handcuffs echoed far louder than the traffic passing through the intersection, and a hush settled over the growing crowd. Marcus looked neither angry nor frightened. His expression reflected something far heavier, as though he had lived through this moment long before this particular morning. Across town, inside St. Augustine Medical Center, an operating room was being prepared with extraordinary urgency. Nurses checked equipment. Specialists reviewed scans. A patient waiting for a life-saving procedure had only a narrow window left. One question suddenly began moving through every hallway with growing concern. Where was Chief Surgeon Dr. Marcus Ellington? The circle around the sidewalk grew larger with every passing second, not because anyone knew the truth, but because people could sense that something about the moment felt deeply uncomfortable. Phones remained raised, quietly recording while whispers spread through the morning crowd. Some assumed the officers had a good reason. Others looked at the man standing calmly in handcuffs and wondered why someone who showed no resistance was being treated like a threat. Marcus Ellington kept his breathing steady. Years of working inside operating rooms had taught him that panic never improved an outcome. He looked directly at Officer Daniel Brooks and spoke with the same measured tone he used when comforting anxious families before surgery. "Officer, I have patients depending on me today. If there is a misunderstanding, I would appreciate the chance to clear it up." Brooks barely acknowledged the request. He continued asking questions in rapid succession, never allowing Marcus enough time to answer completely. Ethan Walker stood nearby, watching both the growing audience and his partners. Increasingly confident assumptions. Although he had not yet questioned Brooks openly, a small feeling of uncertainty began creeping into the back of his mind. Marcus did not match the image of someone trying to hide anything. His answers were consistent. His posture remained composed. Even his eyes reflected exhaustion more than fear. Across the street, an elderly man quietly shook his head while a young mother gently pulled her son a few steps away from the scene. The little boy looked up and asked, "Mom, why did they put those on him?" She hesitated before answering because she did not know the truth herself. "I do not know," she finally whispered. "Sometimes we have to wait until we know all the facts. Those words drifted through the air with more wisdom than anyone realized. Marcus glanced toward the sky as another light rain began falling. Water collected on the shoulders of his hoodie, the same hoodie he had thrown on after changing out of surgical scrubs only minutes earlier. Inside his backpack rested nothing more dangerous than medical journals, a lunch container he had forgotten to eat, and a stethoscope tucked carefully into an inside pocket. Yet appearances often spoke louder than facts when people rushed to conclusions. Several blocks away, inside St. Augustine Medical Center, the atmosphere shifted from routine urgency to genuine concern. A surgical nurse checked the clock again before looking toward the operating suite entrance. "Has anyone reached Dr. Ellington?" she asked. Another staff member shook her head after ending yet another unanswered phone call. The patient scheduled for a complex heart procedure had already completed every preparation. Specialists from 3 departments were assembled. The anesthesia team was ready. Every minute mattered. Emily Carter, the hospital's nursing director, frowned as she reviewed the schedule. Marcus had never missed an operation without personally notifying the team. Never once in nearly 15 years. She dialed his number again, listening as it continued ringing without an answer. Back on the sidewalk, Officer Brooks finally reached for Marcus's wallet to verify his identification. Before he could open it, the police radio attached to his shoulder crackled to life with unusual urgency. Dispatch requested immediate contact with any nearby unit regarding an escalating situation involving St. Augustine Medical Center. Brooks and Walker exchanged a brief glance. Neither of them realized that within the next few moments, the quiet confidence of the man standing before them would make perfect sense, and the story they believed they were controlling was about to turn in a direction neither of them could have imagined. The sharp burst of static from the police radio cut through the morning air, drawing every eye toward Officer Daniel Brooks. Dispatch spoke with unusual urgency, requesting that any available unit respond immediately to St. Augustine Medical Center regarding an emergency involving the hospital's lead cardiac surgery team. Brooks acknowledged the call without changing his expression, assuming it had nothing to do with the man standing quietly before him. Marcus remained still, his eyes focused on the officers rather than the growing audience around them. He had heard every word transmitted through the radio, but he said nothing. Years spent making life-changing decisions under pressure had taught him that timing often mattered as much as truth itself. Ethan Walker glanced at Marcus for a moment before looking back toward Brooks. Something about the situation no longer felt as straightforward as it had only minutes earlier. Dispatch continued speaking. "Attention all units. Hospital administration is attempting to locate Chief Surgeon Dr. Marcus Ellington. Critical procedure delayed. Immediate contact requested if located." For the first time that morning, silence settled between the two officers. Brooks looked down at the identification still resting in his hand but had not yet opened. Ethan slowly reached toward it. "Maybe we should verify his identification first," he said quietly. Brooks hesitated only a second before unfolding the wallet. Inside was a Maryland medical license bearing a familiar face. Dr. Marcus Ellington, the same name that had just echoed through the radio. Brooks stared at the card as if expecting the letters to rearrange themselves into someone else. Instead, every document confirmed the same identity. Hospital identification, medical credentials, staff access badge. Nothing suggested deception. Everything pointed toward a man whose profession revolved around saving lives. Before either officer could speak, another voice came through the radio. "Chief Surgeon still unreachable. Surgical team reports patient cannot proceed without Dr. Ellington. Hospital requests immediate notification if any officer encounters him." Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward Marcus. The calm expression that had seemed unusual only moments earlier suddenly made perfect sense. This was not someone pretending to be important. This was someone accustomed to carrying enormous responsibility without needing to announce it. Around the sidewalk, whispers spread rapidly as nearby spectators overheard fragments of the dispatch. A delivery driver lowered his phone and quietly repeated the name. An elderly woman who had been watching from a bus stop looked carefully at Marcus before recognition crossed her face. "I know him," she said softly. "He treated my husband last year." Another bystander nodded. "My neighbor talks about him all the time. He is one of the best surgeons in the city." The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Curiosity gave way to disbelief. People who had remained silent moments earlier now exchanged uneasy glances, realizing how quickly assumptions had shaped the scene before any facts were known. Marcus finally broke the silence. His voice remained respectful, steady, and remarkably free of anger. "Officers, I told you I needed to get back to the hospital. There is someone waiting for surgery, and every minute matters." No accusation, no raised voice, just a simple statement of responsibility. Brooks felt the weight of every pair of eyes now fixed upon him instead of the man in handcuffs. For the first time that morning, certainty disappeared from his face. In its place came something far more uncomfortable: doubt. Officer Daniel Brooks lowered the identification card with a hand that no longer seemed as steady as it had only moments earlier. The confidence that had shaped every decision since the patrol car stopped now gave way to a growing silence that neither officer knew how to break. Around them, the rain softened into a light mist, but no one walked away. Every person on the sidewalk sensed that the story unfolding before them had shifted in a direction no one expected. Marcus Ellington stood exactly where he had been instructed to stand, his shoulders relaxed despite the uncomfortable situation. He did not demand an apology. He did not remind anyone of his accomplishments. His attention remained fixed on something much more important than his own reputation. Somewhere only a few miles away, a patient was still waiting for a procedure that could not begin without him. At St. Augustine Medical Center, concern had become urgency. Emily Carter walked briskly through the surgical wing with her phone pressed against her ear, calling every number she could think of. Specialists from cardiology, anesthesiology, and nursing gathered near the operating suite, exchanging anxious glances. No one questioned Dr. Ellington's commitment. If he was missing, there had to be a reason beyond his control. Emily made one final decision. She grabbed her keys and headed toward the hospital entrance, determined to search for him herself. Back on the downtown sidewalk, another police vehicle slowed as it passed the gathering crowd, but continued on after recognizing Brooks and Walker handling the situation. The growing audience remained unusually quiet. Several people had lowered their phones, no longer interested in capturing a dramatic confrontation. Instead, they watched two officers wrestling with something far more difficult than paperwork. They were confronting the possibility that their first impression had been entirely wrong. Then, through the light traffic, a silver hospital sport utility vehicle turned the corner and stopped abruptly beside the curb. The driver's door opened before the engine had fully settled. Emily Carter stepped out wearing navy blue medical scrubs beneath a rain jacket, her hospital identification badge swinging against her chest as she hurried toward the officers. Her eyes immediately found Marcus. Relief washed across her face. "Dr. Ellington," she called, her voice filled with both concern and urgency. "We have been searching everywhere for you." She reached the group and stopped, only then noticing the handcuffs. Her expression changed instantly from relief to disbelief. She looked from Marcus to the officers and back again, struggling to understand what she was seeing. "There must be some mistake," she said carefully. "This is Dr. Marcus Ellington, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at St. Augustine Medical Center. The entire surgical team is waiting for him. We have a patient prepared for a critical operation." The words landed with remarkable weight. Even those who had only overheard fragments of the conversation now understood the full picture. Brooks looked toward Emily, searching for some sign that this was all an elaborate misunderstanding. Instead, she removed her hospital identification badge and held it where everyone could see. Marcus's photograph appeared on a staff directory displayed on her phone beside his name and title. There was nothing left to question. Marcus finally looked at Brooks with quiet composure and said, "Officer, I told you someone was depending on me today. I only asked for the opportunity to explain." In that moment, the attention of the crowd shifted completely. No longer were they watching the man who had been stopped. Every eye now rested on the officers, waiting to see what they would choose to do next. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The only sound came from the steady rhythm of rain tapping against parked cars and the distant hum of morning traffic moving through downtown Baltimore. Officer Daniel Brooks stared at the medical identification in his hand before slowly returning it to Marcus Ellington's wallet. Every assumption that had felt certain only minutes earlier now seemed painfully fragile. Officer Ethan Walker looked toward Emily Carter, hoping she might somehow soften what they had just learned. but her expression only confirmed the seriousness of the situation. "The patient is already in the operating room," she said calmly, though the urgency in her voice was impossible to miss. "Multiple surgical teams have been waiting for Dr. Ellington. Every delay increases the pressure on everyone inside that hospital." Brooks swallowed hard as the weight of those words settled over him. This was no longer simply an uncomfortable encounter on a city sidewalk. Real people were depending on decisions that had already been made. Marcus remained composed despite everything that had happened. He looked at Emily with quiet reassurance. "Please tell the team to continue preparing. We will make up the lost time." Even now, his first concern was not himself. It was the patient waiting for him. Several people standing nearby exchanged surprised glances. One man quietly lowered his phone and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Another woman who had been recording the encounter shook her head slowly, realizing she had witnessed something far different from what she first believed. Then another police vehicle arrived. Chief Linda Harper stepped out, having received dispatch updates about the unusual situation developing near the hospital. She approached with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under public scrutiny. Emily immediately recognized her and quickly explained the circumstances, identifying Marcus as the hospital's chief of cardiothoracic surgery and describing the operation that had been delayed. Chief Harper listened without interrupting before turning toward Brooks and Walker. "Is everything she has said accurate?" she asked quietly. Neither officer answered immediately. Brooks finally nodded once. "Yes, Chief." The single word carried more regret than explanation. Harper looked directly at Marcus. "Dr. Ellington, I understand this morning has placed you in an unacceptable position. First, I need to make sure we resolve this immediately." Marcus met her eyes without anger. "Chief, my priority has not changed. Someone inside that hospital needs surgery. The sooner I can return, the better it will be for everyone." Harper gave a slow nod, visibly recognizing the dignity with which he had handled every moment of the encounter. She then looked toward Brooks and Walker with a seriousness that required no raised voice. "Professional. Judgment begins with facts, not assumptions. We will address everything else later." Around the intersection, the crowd remained silent. The emotional balance had completely shifted. Only minutes earlier, strangers had watched Marcus as though he needed to explain himself. Now they watched the officers wrestle with consequences that could not be undone simply by correcting a mistake. Brooks stepped closer to Marcus, his confidence replaced by hesitation. "Dr. Ellington," he began carefully, The words stopped before they could become a complete sentence. Some moments demanded more than rehearsed language. Marcus understood that. He looked toward the hospital vehicle waiting at the curb, then back at the officers. "Every person has the opportunity to make a better decision than the last one," he said quietly. "The important question is whether we choose to learn before someone else pays the price." Those words lingered in the cool morning air long after they were spoken, and no one standing there would ever remember that day for the flashing lights. They would remember it for the lesson that followed. Emily Carter opened the rear passenger door of the hospital vehicle, but Marcus Ellington did not immediately step inside. Instead, he turned once more toward Chief Linda Harper with the same quiet composure that had defined every moment of the morning. "Chief," he said gently, "before I leave, I would appreciate one thing." Harper nodded without hesitation. "What is it, Doctor?" Marcus looked briefly at the handcuffs that had only moments earlier been removed from his wrists before meeting her eyes again. "Please make sure this becomes a lesson, not only for the officers standing here, but for every officer who wears the uniform tomorrow." His voice carried no bitterness. There was no demand for revenge, no public humiliation, no dramatic speech meant to embarrass anyone. The simplicity of his request settled over the intersection with unexpected weight. Chief Harper understood immediately. She had spent more than 2 decades in law enforcement, and she knew that public trust was built one encounter at a time. "You have my word," she replied. "This incident will receive a complete review, and we will learn from it." Marcus offered a small nod, accepting the response before turning toward Officers Daniel Brooks and Ethan Walker. Brooks looked as though he wanted to explain every decision that had brought them to this point, but the words never seemed large enough to bridge the distance created by a single morning. Finally, he spoke. "Dr. Ellington, I made assumptions before I understood who you were." Marcus answered quietly. "Officer, The greater problem is that respect should never depend on who someone turns out to be. The sentence landed harder than any accusation ever could have. Ethan lowered his eyes, realizing that Marcus had not corrected him by pointing to titles, achievements, or authority. Instead, he had reminded everyone present that dignity belongs to every person before anyone knows their profession, income, or position. Several members of the crowd quietly nodded as those words spread through the gathering. One elderly woman wiped away a tear before whispering to the stranger standing beside her, "That is exactly what my father used to say." Nearby, the young boy who had earlier asked his mother why Marcus had been handcuffed looked back toward the doctor with quiet admiration. Children often noticed character before status, and even he could sense the difference between winning an argument and teaching a lesson. Chief Harper stepped closer to Brooks and Walker. Her voice remained calm, but unmistakably firm. "Return to the precinct after completing the required documentation. Preserve all body camera recordings and submit every report before the end of your shift. There will be an administrative review." Neither officer objected. They simply acknowledged the instruction, fully aware that accountability had already begun long before any paperwork would be filed. Marcus then entered the hospital vehicle beside Emily Carter. As the sport utility vehicle pulled away from the curb, many in the crowd instinctively stepped aside, watching in silence as it disappeared into the morning traffic. Inside the vehicle, Emily glanced toward Marcus with visible relief. "The operating room is ready," she said. "Everyone has been waiting for you." Marcus looked out the rain-speckled window as buildings slipped past one after another. "Then let us not keep them waiting any longer," he answered. There was no celebration in his voice, only quiet determination. Behind them, the flashing patrol lights remained on the empty sidewalk, but the focus had shifted forever. The story was no longer about a mistaken stop. It had become a reminder that true character reveals itself most clearly when someone has every reason to seek revenge, but instead chooses responsibility, compassion, and the chance for others to become better than they were only moments before. By the time the hospital vehicle reached St. Augustine Medical Center, the atmosphere inside had become a careful balance of urgency and discipline. Medical professionals moved quickly through brightly lit corridors, but no one allowed anxiety to replace precision. As soon as Marcus Ellington stepped through the entrance, conversations paused for only a heartbeat before the entire team instinctively fell back into rhythm. Emily Carter walked beside him, providing the latest updates without wasting a single word. The patient's condition remained stable. Every specialist was in position. Every instrument had been checked twice. Marcus listened carefully while slipping into the calm focus that had guided him through countless difficult procedures. The events of the morning remained in his memory, yet he refused to let them follow him into the operating room. Someone's future depended on complete concentration, and that responsibility outweighed everything else. Before entering the restricted surgical area, Marcus stopped outside a waiting room where a worried family sat together in silence. Their eyes immediately filled with relief when they recognized him approaching. An older woman stood first, clasping both hands together as though she had been holding her breath for hours. "Dr. Ellington," she whispered, "they told us you were delayed." Marcus offered a reassuring smile that carried quiet confidence rather than false promises. "I am here now," he replied gently. "My team is prepared, and we are going to give your loved one the very best care we can." Those simple words eased a burden no medical machine could measure. Across town, inside police headquarters, Chief Linda Harper had already begun reviewing the reports submitted by officers Daniel Brooks and Ethan Walker. Every document was placed beside dispatch recordings, body camera files, and witness statements collected from the scene. Harper believed accountability required facts instead of assumptions, and she intended to examine every minute exactly as it had happened. Several supervisors gathered in the conference room, watching portions of the recordings in complete silence. What stood out most was not raised voices or dramatic confrontation. It was something far more uncomfortable. Marcus had remained respectful from beginning to end. He had answered questions calmly. He had cooperated fully. The recordings revealed how quickly conclusions had formed before evidence had been examined. Brooks sat quietly at the end of the table, replaying each decision in his own mind. The confidence he had felt that morning now seemed impossible to understand. Ethan remained equally silent, realizing how easily hesitation could become participation when someone failed to question a partner's judgment. Meanwhile, downtown, videos recorded by bystanders continued spreading across social media. Many viewers expected to see another ordinary traffic stop. Instead, they watched a story that challenged something much deeper than procedure. Comment after comment focused on the same lesson. Respect should never depend upon discovering that someone holds an important title. Reporters began requesting statements from both the police department and St. Augustine Medical Center, but neither organization rushed to shape the public conversation. They understood that credibility came from honesty, not speed. Inside the operating suite, Marcus completed his final preparation before looking around at the team assembled beside him. Every face reflected trust built through years of working together. He took one steady breath and nodded. The room became completely focused on the patient lying before them. Outside those doors, debates about assumptions, responsibility, and accountability would continue. Inside, none of that mattered. There was only one purpose shared by every person wearing surgical scrubs that morning: to give another human being the chance to wake up and continue living the life waiting beyond those hospital walls. Several hours later, the red light above the operating room quietly switched off, and a deep breath seemed to move through the entire surgical floor. Nurses who had been watching the clock finally exchanged relieved smiles as Marcus Ellington stepped out, removed his surgical cap, and thanked every member of the team before speaking to the waiting family. The older woman who had greeted him earlier rose from her chair with trembling hands. Marcus offered the same calm expression he had carried all day. "The procedure went well," he said gently. "Your husband is stable, and the next 24 hours will be important, but he has every reason to keep fighting." Tears of relief filled the family's eyes. They thanked every nurse, every physician, and finally Marcus himself, but he quietly redirected the praise toward the entire surgical team. "No one saves a life alone," he said. Today was the work of many dedicated people. While hope returned inside the hospital, accountability continued across town. Chief Linda Harper completed her initial review alongside the department's professional standards division. Every body camera recording, every dispatch transmission, and every witness statement told the same story. The encounter had begun with assumptions instead of verified facts. Although Marcus had remained respectful and cooperative from beginning to end, opportunities to slow down, ask better questions, and verify information had been overlooked. Before the afternoon briefing concluded, Harper addressed the command staff. "Professional authority carries enormous responsibility," she said. "Public confidence depends on our willingness to admit mistakes, learn from them, and improve." Administrative action was initiated according to department policy, and officers Daniel Brooks and Ethan Walker were temporarily reassigned pending the outcome of the formal review. Neither officer protested the decision. Brooks quietly accepted every document placed before him. Throughout the day, Marcus's words echoed repeatedly in his mind. Respect should never depend on who someone turns out to be. He realized that sentence would remain with him far longer than any disciplinary process. Ethan experienced a similar reflection. Looking back at the morning, he recognized several moments when he had sensed uncertainty but failed to speak. He understood that professional integrity sometimes required questioning a partner before a situation became something neither officer intended. Meanwhile, news organizations reported that St. Augustine Medical Center had successfully completed the delayed surgery and that the patient was expected to recover. Public attention gradually shifted away from dramatic headlines and toward the larger conversation unfolding throughout the city. Community leaders, medical professionals, and retired law enforcement officers all shared a remarkably similar message. Character is revealed not during comfortable moments, but during unexpected ones. At the hospital, Marcus finally changed into fresh clothes before walking toward the employee parking garage. Emily Carter caught up with him, carrying a cup of hot coffee. "You have had quite a day," she said with a tired smile. Marcus accepted the cup gratefully before looking back toward the hospital entrance, where families continued arriving with hope, fear, and faith in the people waiting inside. "Tomorrow," he answered quietly, "someone else will walk through those doors needing help. That is the part one choose to remember." Emily nodded without another word. She understood exactly what he meant. The greatest victory of the day was never about proving who Marcus was. It was about refusing to let misunderstanding change the kind of man he had chosen to become long before anyone ever knew his name. The following week, sunlight poured through the tall windows of St. Augustine Medical Center, washing the lobby in a warm glow that felt very different from the gray morning when everything had begun. Patients checked in, volunteers greeted visitors, and families waited with the familiar mixture of hope and uncertainty that filled every hospital each day. Life had moved forward, yet the lessons from that single encounter continued to ripple far beyond the walls of the medical center. Inside a conference room at police headquarters, Chief Linda Harper stood before officers from every division during a department-wide training session. She did not mention names. She did not seek to embarrass anyone. Instead, she displayed one sentence across the screen behind her. Respect begins before identification. The room remained completely silent as she reminded every officer that authority earned public trust only when it was exercised with fairness, patience, and humility. Daniel Brooks sat quietly among his fellow officers, listening with a perspective he had never possessed before. He no longer believed experience alone guaranteed good judgment. He understood that every encounter began with a choice, and every choice shaped someone's memory of justice. Ethan Walker felt the same responsibility. Both men had accepted additional community engagement assignments as part of the department's effort to strengthen relationships throughout the city. Change, they realized, did not begin with speeches. It began with different decisions made one conversation at a time. Across town, Marcus Ellington walked through another ordinary day at the hospital. He met with residents, encouraged young medical students, and stopped to speak with every patient who recognized him in the hallway. To each person, he offered the same kindness that had carried him through the hardest moments of his career. One afternoon, the family whose loved one had undergone surgery asked if they could thank him once more before returning home. The older woman smiled through grateful tears and handed him a handwritten letter instead of a gift. Marcus accepted it with quiet appreciation and said, "Your family's hope gave all of us something worth working for." As he watched them leave together, Emily Carter joined him near the hospital entrance. "Do you ever wish that morning had never happened?" she asked softly. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "I wish no one would ever be judged before they are known," he said. "But if one difficult day teaches someone to see another person differently tomorrow, then perhaps something good can still grow from it." Emily smiled because she knew those words reflected the man he had always been. Months later, the story was remembered not because a respected surgeon had been delayed on his way to work, but because he chose dignity over resentment, responsibility over anger, and compassion over pride. The city slowly forgot the flashing lights, but it remembered the lesson. A badge can represent authority. A title can represent achievement. But neither one reveals the true measure of a human being. Character appears in the quiet choices no one expects, in the patience shown when frustration would be easier, and in the courage to treat every stranger with equal respect before learning a single detail about their life. Because in the end, justice is never defined by who stands in front of you. It is defined by how you choose to see them.